Hello, welcome to the Pearl Virtual Summit. My name is Katrina Griffin, and today we are going to talk about how feedback saved me from drowning in a sea of grading. So I've been teaching for 22 years, which is crazy. And I can tell you that if I had to grade every single paper that students turned in, I would definitely be this person here with my hand up asking for help because I'd be drowning. Something that we use in my department is the TELL project, so Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. And they have this great tool to sort of self-assess how we're doing in different areas of teaching. And this one is for performance and feedback. And today we're going to take a closer look at the second one, the second part of this domain. The teacher helps students become more effective communicators by providing feedback and encouraging peer feedback and self-reflection. So this could probably be an entire day workshop or a week-long workshop or something, but we are going to do this in like 20 to 30 minutes. So you might have a lot of questions. So just reach out if you have questions. My email is on the first slide and it'll be on the last slide as well. So feedback, is it making the grade? Let's see. So we're going to start with a couple examples from my personal life. My parents, they're not like hoarders on like the TLC show where you can't like move through the house, but they did save a lot of my things. And so one day I went home and they gave me a whole stack of my artwork from when I was a child. So I was like 40 years old. So this is one piece of artwork that I got back. And, you know, I look at it with the teacher lens and I was like, you can see it's mine, right? There's my little name. But then I look at this and I was like, what is this? Try to color inside the lines. Was that supposed to be feedback? A frowny face? I mean, I was trying to color inside the lines. That's me trying to color inside the lines. So that statement is not really helpful. And it makes me kind of sad to look at it. This is another one. And this is from a former student of mine. You're going to have to brace yourselves. This is an actual essay that he got back. And this poor student came to me for help and he was distraught. I mean, he loved German and he'd come with me to Germany, but when he got this back, he was like, I don't even know what this is. And it took me a long time to sift through this. And I didn't even know what to tell him. Neither one of us could read this. There were so many comments. You know, infinitive, spelling, Deutsch. And the German student in me just wanted to say, like, if I knew what the infinitive was, I would have used it, but this is like me trying my best. So if you don't tell me what the right things are, I don't know how to fix it. Because if I did, I would have done it. Anyway, the student gave me a clean copy of his essay and we went from there, but this is not helpful. This is not feedback. It's just depressing. So what is feedback anyway? Let's take a look. We're gonna look through some feedback as opposed to another response. And just try and get an idea of what the differences are. And I have to say, some of these are actually from my world. So the first one, I don't see any supporting details in the thesis statement. In a former life, I wrote weak thesis statement. Here's some more to give you another idea. Ouch. Clear. Now that's a word I used to use a lot. Each of your arguments are supported by evidence from the text. This is an excellent argument. These two adjectives don't have gender agreements with the noun. Don't you know by now which nouns are masculine and which are feminine? That should say feminine. You supported your opinion with evidence from the text. Good. Ooh, so what did you notice? You probably noticed that the feedback, as opposed to the other comments, is very specific. So it's specific to the task. It's a recognition of the goal or the standard of performance, and it's about the present position in relation to the goal. And then there's some understanding of how to close the gap between the two of those things. So the teacher shares performance criteria with the student that measure effectiveness in communication. So if we look back here, we have to have some sort of standard or goal for our students so that we can refer to this. So what might this look like? It might look like criteria for success. So we're telling students what they need to include in their paper. Now, sometimes teachers will say like, oh, you need to include like this many words. But this does, by asking students to include a number of words, it doesn't really tell them what they're supposed to do with those words. So our criteria for success are telling students what we're expecting them to have. So maybe they can do it in 50 words or 100 words or however many words. It doesn't matter to me as long as they do these things. And we're going to use that criteria to give students feedback based on their performance. So here's two examples. These are from level 1. One is on German and one is Spanish. It's a very similar assignment. Students get an email and they have to write a reply. So we can use that box of criteria to point to things that they have done, and to point out things that they've done well, to point out things that they might need to improve, and it makes it a lot faster. So I don't have to write full sentences. I can use arrows based on what I already wrote. And then we've got these rubrics for the how you've done everything. So back there on the criteria, that's the what they need to include, and this is how they did that. So this is an example from the Spanish teacher. This would be an example of a lot of feedback that I would give a student. This is probably the most feedback, but I wanted to point out to the student what they did well, so that they keep doing it, so that it's not an accident. You can see in the margins that I gave them the words that they needed. Maybe they chose the wrong word, and so I gave them the correct word. And then I wrote them a few sentences about what they did well, what they need to improve, and how we're going to improve it together. But that takes a long time, right? So who are all the people that can give feedback? You can do student to student, student to self, teacher to student, student to teacher, teacher to teacher, even leader to teacher. And I love this idea from Greta Lundgaard. So if we go back here, before we talk about Greta, I think the area where we spend the most amount of time, if we look at this slide, is we think teacher to student. So I have to be the one giving the feedback, right? But if you saw the previous example where we wrote a little paragraph and then marked up the text, that takes a long time, you know? Let's say you spend 1 minute per paper, you're spending an hour if you've got 60 students, and we just don't have time for that. So Meredith White, I'm not sure if you guys are on Twitter, Meredith White posted and shared something about how she approaches feedback. One of the things that I loved about that post was she gives students a box. Do you want feedback or do you not want feedback? And that really can help streamline, like, if your students don't even want feedback, they're not going to use it or do anything with it. So that's one way you can go. Another way that you can go is, what kind of feedback are you going to give each student? Where can I use an upgrade? Can you get what I'm saying? Where did I razzle dazzle? And just asking students what they're looking for. Or maybe they're not ready for any at all, because sometimes they're not. You can also do entire class feedback. This is a form that Laura Terrell has shared with us. And so you would read all the essays, and instead of putting feedback on all of the papers, you would just think about how the class did and what the patterns that you saw are, and giving students a class feedback. This is what my Spanish teacher did with that. She came up with a slide based on something that they do in AP for simulated conversation. And she gave the students this slide and said, you know, as a class, this is where we need to move forward. Thinking about feedback essential. So we talked about the fact that it has to be specific to, it has to be specific. It's not a comment. So like a grade doesn't tell us anything. Specific tells us where we are in relation to the goal or standard and how to close that gap if there is a gap. Feedback is also goal-oriented, tangible, and transparent. It's user-friendly, it's ongoing, it's consistent, and it's progress towards a goal. And it's also timely, right? And therein lies the crux. So yeah, sure, we could do all this stuff, but then there's that thing called time. And we just don't have it. We don't have time, guys. So what are we going to do? I mean, they even put it on the tell thing. We're supposed to give students feedback that is close in time to the demonstrated performance. Yikes. So what do we do with this guy? These are those turn-in bins, right? So you do something in class, kids do it, they turn it in this bin, and then when do they get it back? So we got to get rid of these bins, right? We need to maximize our time in class. We need to give feedback while students are doing their work, and we need to have them be able to give each other feedback so that those papers aren't going into the bin, you know, never to be seen for like a week or 2 weeks, or let's be honest, a month. And I know some of you just make the papers disappear sometimes, because that's just how it is. Some of those papers, they're just like, where did they go? I don't know, kids. So, you know, students have something to do, and then you have to keep working on that thing. It just doesn't go into this bin. So we're going to keep working with what the students have. So we want to move from this idea of teacher to student feedback to students providing each other with feedback and even themselves. So one of the ways we can do that is with peer editing. And of course, you need to train your students, right? This isn't just like, hey, kids, we're going to peer edit. No, that's recipe for disaster. You've got to model it for them and show them what you're looking for, right? So you're going to train your students, and as you're training them, you're going to keep your discussion about the work, not the person. You're going to use criteria for success and the rubric to keep the conversation about the work. You're always going to look for what that author did well. Everybody's doing something well. There's something positive about every single thing that these kids are doing. So we're making them, and ourselves, let's be honest, find what those good things are. So here's that email reply. Again, you've got the criteria for success. And then we're going to take these criteria for success, and that's what I'm going to use to have my students do a partner review. So they're not looking for grammar errors. I don't need them for that, because they might not be able to correct it, or they might correct it the wrong way, which is not what we want. But they can look for specific things. Is this even in German? Is there a letter opening? And if so, what is it? Write it down. Is there a greeting? If so, what is it? Write it down. And this is going to save you from, you know, you have Angela's paper, and she's super smart. And so you're just like, oh, Angela, like, check. She's so smart. Like, it's wonderful. Like, here's your paper back. No. The kids have to provide evidence of what they found, and give each other feedback. Here's an example in Spanish. And so that those spaces and lines are for students to show what they are finding. And it makes the conversation that they have with their partner then very clear, because if the partner's like, no, I totally did that, here it is, they can see that. And this also frees you up. Now you are free to walk around your classroom and give individual feedback to students, to look at papers, to make grammar, syntax, usage errors, take a look at those, and do some individual work with students. So having kids do this partner work frees you up. Here's another one. This one has some of the student answers. And these are going to vary depending on the level. Sometimes you're going to see more English. Sometimes you're going to see more things in the target language. It just sort of depends on where we are in our learning. This is another one. This is an essay. We even did this virtually. You can do this literally anywhere you want. So you've got the criteria for success. They're the same ones that the students got on their papers. We have the examples that the students have pulled from the essay. And then this is the original essay. That's the original student sample. So it's all there together. So you can either have them write it down or type it up. I also recommend using exemplars. So you can take students' names off the papers. You know, it might take, if you're doing this for the first time, you've never, let's say you're having students produce something and it's the first time they've produced it, you know, you'll need a day to get your exemplars for students to look at. But then they can, if you've got them from the previous year, you can have a stack of these things that kids have written or spoken, because you can also do this with audio samples. And they can look at the sample, no names are on it, and find things based on the sample. It's also a great way for students to see, you know, the range of what is possible for them to do, right? Because we want them to do usually more than what they're doing. Some kids are just shooting to hit the criteria. So within those criteria, like what is possible? And then we definitely want to move students into this, into using the feedback that we have given them. So often I hear like, oh, like I give the students feedback and then they like don't do anything with it. Well, you have to make them do something with it. You know, like ideally the next step is they've got this and then they do a rewrite. And a lot of times teachers are like, oh, like there's a fear of like making students write and rewrite. But if it's just sort of like what you do, it becomes very natural. But there's another way you can approach this. You can approach it through essay reflections. So having students, we keep student work in a folder portfolio. They reread their essays. We've saved them from year to year or throughout the year. Can they understand what they wrote? What did they do well? Compare this essay to previous essays, read the teacher feedback. What kinds of errors are you seeing? Where have you progressed? It makes students really look at what they're doing, especially as students move into this intermediate, mid, intermediate, high range. They sometimes don't see their growth. So having them revisit their essays is a great way for them to see how they're growing and progressing towards proficiency. You can also have them do this as a read aloud, and students have well-developed ears by the time that they're writing essays. So we have them every once in a while read an essay aloud and they record it on their phone. And then they jot down what they've heard and then they listen to it just by themselves. Nobody else listens to this. And then they are able to hear different things. And it's really interesting. I remember the first time I did this, the student listened to their essay and they're like, oh, my word order is all off. And I was like, yes, your word order is off. And I've been telling you all year. But all they had to do was just listen and they heard it themselves. The other thing that happens is they'll hear, they thought that they wrote one thing, but when they read it aloud and listen to it, they hear it differently than what they thought that they wrote. And you can have kids, you know, they're sitting silently. Yeah, I reread my essay. Yeah, I got it. But there's something about reading it out loud and listening to it on your own that really helped students zero in on what they need to change or fix. And then you have them make an action plan. How are they going to use this feedback to progress? So yeah, that's great. I have a problem, but now what are we going to do? Are you going to meet with a teacher? Are you going to talk to someone in class? Are there videos that you're going to watch? What are we going to do to work on this? And then we briefly touched on this earlier when we talked about the turn-in bin, is maximizing our time that we have in class. So I don't have time to turn things in, and y'all, I don't have time to be putting marks on all these papers. There's no way. I can't do it. You can't do it. It's just not possible. So one of the things that we like to do are these visible thinking routines, which is a whole other workshop in and of itself. But they make students show you what's going on in their minds so that you can give them feedback live as you're having class. And so we're going to wrap up our time together here with a visible thinking routine. If we were together, I would have you stop and think, what did you used to think about feedback and what do you think now? And this could be, I used to think and I still think. I used to think and now I think. What have you learned about feedback? Use a sentence frames to reflect with yourself or with a partner that you're watching with. And hopefully these quick tips will help you from drowning in a sea of grading, because you don't have to put grades on everything. You can just show students where they are in relation to where they want to be, or they can show themselves. So thank you for joining us today. We're here at the Pearl Virtual Summit 2022. Thanks. Bye.